Welcome to Keep Going, a podcast about failure and success, hosted by John Biggs. Every week, we talk to an amazing person about a time they failed and what they learned. And remember, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Hi, and welcome back to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. I'm John Biggs. Today on the show, we have Don DeRosa, co-founder and CEO of Eonix. Welcome, Don.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Eonix first before we get into the abject failure that you experienced?
Yeah, sure. So Eonix is an accelerated materials discovery company that focuses on designing new materials for lithium-ion batteries to adapt them for different market applications. So if you think about batteries, they're all around you. I have one on my wrist. I have my phone in my pocket. I drive an EV. So we have lithium-ion batteries throughout the day that we encounter. They all have different properties and features that we want. So consumer electronics, you don't need them to last for 20 years, but you want them to last throughout the day. So you want them to store enough energy to be able to use them without having to constantly charge them. In contrast, I really want my EV battery to last for 10 to 15 years. I wanted to have durability. So there are different chemistries for different markets. And what our company specializes in is rapidly discovering new materials to address those different pain points. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a linear journey getting here. We definitely started out in a completely different direction. So it's where the failure part comes in.
Okay. Yeah. So why don't we talk about that? I mean, it sounds like EVs and battery technology are going to be pretty expensive. The failures are pretty expensive when they happen, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, when you're designing new materials, I mean, it's very expensive, it's very time consuming, and it typically fails. So for us, we looked at the problem not being, we don't have kind of like a silver bullet for materials. The real problem is it takes a lot of money and a lot of time to design new products for this space. So we need a better approach, a better framework for product development. And that's really how the Eonix came to be what it is today. Okay. So yeah, I mean, we can jump into our kind of the genesis of this, if that's where you want to get right into.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So we originally spun out of a College of Nanoscale Science and Engineering up in New York in 2014. So quite some time ago. We were looking to commercialize two molecules to go into energy storage devices. So just two molecules. We thought they had merit, and they do from like a scientific perspective. We received some early funding, which we were very grateful for from a state agency, about $500,000 to look at these two molecules. Spent 2 years of our lives reviewing them. Trying to figure out, where they were succeeding, how to put them in a position to make the devices better. At the conclusion of it, we found that one of the two worked really well. And then from there, we were like, all right, cool. Let's scale this up. Started reviewing the synthesis process, trying to, get this product out the door. Found that it was going to be 600 times more expensive than the incumbent material that we were looking to replace.
So how long were you researching this?
Well, I mean, we picked it. It was being researched for a really long time before us too, but we put in 2 years and $500,000 into to looking at this two molecules. So yeah, pretty decent amount of time and pretty decent amount of capital, and pretty disappointing result to then learn that it was incredibly expensive to scale. And at the conclusion of that, I really was just left saying, I wish that this didn't take 2 years of my life, considerable amount of capital, which I understand, for other companies or other spaces that really doesn't seem like a lot. But if it takes us $500,000 in 2 years to determine if something is going to work or not, and then eventually fail for one of many reasons, then that's not really a scalable approach to innovating in the space. So
how did it feel at that point when you were like, when you realized that you had spent $500,000 to find out to make a mistake? Well, not really make a mistake, right? It was to discover that that wasn't the course.
Yeah. I honestly, depressing, but not for the reasons you think. So it was devastating to find out, I think, day one, when we came to that realization. But what was really concerning was the fact that, I just took a look at this and I was like, every other lab, every other company is using the same techniques and the same approaches that we're using, to discover new materials. And we're never going to do this as a society. Like it's going to take a tremendous amount of capital and time if we're going to discover new materials, for better energy storage, for better batteries, if we're just using conventional approaches. So I was mostly depressed by that fact that, there are labs throughout the country, throughout the world, spending tens of millions of dollars, and years, if not decades of man hours, trying to discover new materials. Like, this is not a good equation for success, for the industry and for society. So for us, we realized that we needed a new approach. We needed a new way to discover materials. So that failure, it was painful. It was depressing, but it was enlightening in the sense that, we wouldn't be where we are today, as a company and having developed the technology we have, if it wasn't for that very difficult lesson.
So that's an interesting situation. So you were able to take the failure and re-engineer it. What do you think was specific about your team or the topic or the science that allowed you to do that?
I think just the fact that there wasn't a lot of innovation that was being focused on the processes of materials discovery itself, and the incentive structure isn't really there. I would say in any organization that would typically take a look at this, if you're in academia, which I think would be the natural place where you would start to question, okay, how can we measure things differently? How can we design new electrochemical techniques? Their focus has really shifted over the past few decades into, we need to make something really brand new and have a splash in publications. So I don't see the incentive structure being there. And then in a corporate environment, it's more a quarter to quarter driven decision-making structure. So you're not really taking a hard look at the fundamentals of how you're looking at materials. Your decision-making is a bit short-sighted. And I would say even in a conventional startup that's being spun out, you take in private investment and results are expected, 3-6 months out. You're not going to have the time or the resources to really tackle this problem. And we were very fortunate because from there we decided to avoid private capital and go with grant funding, as well as funding through the DoD for specific projects. That gave us the time and the resources to tackle this very specific problem. So, I mean, huge shout out to the Department of Energy and Oak Ridge National Lab for giving us essentially 2 years to tackle this problem and figure out how to design an accelerated materials discovery platform. We would not be where we are today if it wasn't for that level of flexibility provided by them.
What would you say to a startup that's kind of in the same position? Like they took X number of months to find out that their product wasn't there. What would you recommend? I mean, you guys were lucky that you guys were in a almost an academic sort of field, and it's a scientific thing. So it's not like, I don't know, a chat app. So first off, from a personal level, what would you recommend in terms of trying to pivot and trying to fix yourself? And then from an investment level, what are some of the best practices that you think folks need to think about when they're in that kind of situation?
Well, I mean, if it's software, I think you're a little bit fortunate because you can kill it fast. So it's less tectonic than deep tech and hard tech. This is like driving a massive ship. So your pivots are measured in years, not in weeks. So in software, if you've encountered kind of a similar obstacle, you have an opportunity to kill it and move on. And I think in that situation, that's a bit of a benefit, the agility associated with being able to shut down the idea. Now, to say that that's always the right decision isn't necessarily the case. I think, you paid for those lessons in terms of those mistakes you've made. The minute you find out about those occurring, it's going to be really painful and depressing, as it was for us. But there's going to be a litany of companies behind you, if there's a compelling market opportunity for that product, who are going to pay to make the same mistake, most likely. So you have an advantage in that sense. You've already learned something that the market hasn't, broadly speaking. So if you can take that and learn from it, then it's an advantage potentially for you to be able to utilize relative to future competitors or even current competitors in the space. From an investment perspective, tough pill to swallow. I mean, there are stories of people giving back capital, so it depends if it's private or not. But similar situation. If you invested those dollars in that certain route, you can either learn from it. I mean, you basically paid for an education, a private education in the space, or you can continue to make the same mistakes. So, yeah, but it's incredibly difficult, whether it's software or hard tech, to take a look at how to handle this. And for us, I mean, nobody was questioning the techniques that we were attempting to change. So that is still a fairly radical approach. When you encounter failure, sometimes you have to take a radical approach, radical pivot as well, and that's a lesson that you paid for. So
yeah,
you might as well use it.
That's an interesting concept, the idea that you pay for this lesson. After doing that kind of sunk cost kind of situation, what encouraged you to take a different approach? What was specific in the project?
I would say a recognition that this was a broad problem. So having seen other facilities, having seen how other companies operate in the space, coming to that realization that the economics of designing a product in this space were so outrageous. I mean, you can look up some publicly traded companies right now that are developing next generation batteries. They've raised either hundreds of millions or over $1 billion, and they've still yet to deploy a product into the space after a decade. So, and those are publicly traded companies. So, I mean, this is an incredibly difficult space to design products in. So, coming to that realization, it seemed crystal clear that this was a good area to target. That's not always going to be the case. But I mean, we had just spent 2 years and a decent amount of capital going through the problem. We were a bit, I think, fortunate from recognizing that in real time as the issue, if that makes sense.
Sure. And what would you recommend for startups that are like solving these kinds of hard problems?
In the hard tech space specifically?
Like something bigger than I don't know, Fitbit for dogs, right?
Oh. Well, I mean, I would say that the playbook is a lot different than Fitbit for dogs, and the people who are making Fitbit for dogs have no shortage of advice to give you. I would say don't typically accept it. There's an overwhelming amount of software advice centered around SaaS. I mean, rightfully so. That's been the most successful from a startup perspective. That playbook doesn't work. A lot of people will be like, go out, you have 3 months. If it doesn't work in 3 months, you're done. 3 months is not even close. You're not going to learn anything in 3 months in deep tech or hard tech. Once you get into science, that's a considerable challenge. I would say, the timeline is going to be a lot different. So buckle up, get ready for that. Managing cash is the most important thing. So you should always be 6 to 9 months shored up. And if you're not, then, get out there and find capital or fundraise. This is, going going to sound like obvious advice, but you really have to take a Tesla Roadster approach. You have to find super low volume, super high margin out of the gate, and then eventually scale into the masses. So start with your Roadster, then build your Model S, and then eventually get to your 3. Because unlike software, you don't just get to work with AWS to immediately scale up as you get more users. So more customers actually presents more problems, and you're going to have to organically address that.
Like I've always heard of like the unicycle, bicycle, motorcycle approach, but I think that's and I guess you get to a car, but that Tesla Roadster idea is fairly unique. Why don't you talk just a little bit more about that?
Well, in the sense, I think they had a great approach. Building a car is difficult. I think Elon Musk talks about how there's 2 auto manufacturers who haven't gone bankrupt, them and Ford. So it's incredibly difficult. And for us, it wasn't just product development; it's also getting materials out the door. And even when you hit success in hard tech, it's going to present a lot of issues from a volume perspective. So if you can find markets and customers where you address a significant pain point and you're able to ship lower volumes at higher margin, that's going to sustain you, and that's going to allow you to grow into those larger markets. And you're going to learn a lot of things along the way. So making stuff is incredibly difficult, even if 99% of the stuff has been made in your product and you're only adding that 1%, which is what we do. We're designing a liquid electrolyte for different markets. We just drop in a liquid into a cell, we seal it, and then we ship it out. But just dropping in liquid has its own set of complexities. I mean, 99% of the battery is already made, and we still hit challenges in terms of that final production step. So if you're in that space, or if you're in a deep tech space, starting with a smaller volume will allow you to identify these challenges while also shipping product. So I mean, I would gather, everything that Tesla learned from getting the Roadster out the door, from customer engagement to small production issues. Like I know that they have a pretty famous story about running out of USB cables and having to go to all the stores in the local region, buying them up just because they were out of that one specific item, and it was halting production and shipping to cars. You're going to encounter 1,000 versions of those. So being able to slowly ramp up volume and learn is going to be incredibly valuable. And for us, I mean, we're lucky to a certain extent. I mean, it's, it was part of our strategy, but we designed a non-flammable liquid electrolyte that can go into batteries manufactured today. That represents a very high margin, initially low volume product for us to get out into the space. So defense and aerospace applications where flammability and safety is paramount have been willing to pay more, and they're significantly lower in volume. So for us, we're able to organically grow into that space.
So did you eventually make your 500,000 back?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, yeah. So I would say from a value perspective, 500,000 was a pretty good investment to identify that market as early as we did, or identify that issue, that opportunity. Then I mean, other companies they're learning right now, spending tens of millions. Mm-hmm. So yeah, 500 was a steal at this point. To know all the way back in 2016, we needed to figure out a new way to measure devices, and it was a long process, but yeah, very much worth it today.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds wild to the average person. The average founder is like thinking to themselves, okay, 500,000, I could run my company for a year on that, and to have that go up in smoke. But I mean, you basically did, right? You basically ran the company for X amount of time. We did. And yeah, it was, I mean, I, as I said earlier, I view it as paying for a lesson. How much does somebody pay to get an MBA from Harvard? I mean, let's look at that. For us,
we learned everything in and out of the business. We had a very intimate understanding of what the market was. We learned it in real time. So we didn't get a degree at the end of it, but we definitely had a pretty comprehensive understanding of what was going on, what the pain point was. And if the market's there, that amount of money to learn about what the problems are in the space, hands-on, is pretty decent. So
yeah, the money was almost like a sonar, right? To bring the fish up to the surface. And if you didn't have that, then you would basically be you'd just still be fishing probably.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Don, thank you for joining us. This has been pretty cool. He's the CEO and co-founder of Eonix. What's the website?
Eonixenergy.com.
All right, and we'll check out your bags of electrolytes.
Appreciate it.
That's kind of scary. All right.
Yeah.
This has been Keep Going. I'm John Biggs. We will see you next week.